note here is that because we had a waiting list for this, we decided that we are going to be recording the panel portion of this event, just the panel portion of this event, not the small discussion groups, so that you're aware of that. All these introductions aside, I'm now going to turn to my friend and colleague and CNI consultant, Dr. Joelle Salinas, who is an assistant professor of neurology at New York University, and he will kick us off. Dr. Salinas.
Thank you, Bob. So I think from my perspective, which is grounded in behavioral neurology, where I'm an expert in people's brains and their behaviors, I think what I wanted to help kind of impart for this session was one, just to kind of give an understanding of kind of what these emotions are at the level of the brain, explain a little bit about kind of what this idea of processing can mean, and then a concrete tool. So in terms of understanding kind of what's going on at the level of the brain with any kind of emotion, I think one way that I think is really helpful to think about emotions is across two different dimensions, where you've got kind of on one kind of your level of kind of energy or alertness, and another is kind of the spectrum of pleasure and pain. So if on one side you have pain and the other pleasure, and then at the lowest here you have kind of being calm, and up here is alert, you can actually kind of map out all the different emotions somewhere along that map, from kind of being really exuberant and elated, being pleasure and alert, to kind of fear and anxiety being more on the side of pain and kind of high level of alertness. And what happens is, so either a thought or a situation comes up, it involves your context, it relates to like past memories in the brain, and signals kind of travel through these neural pathways to essentially kind of send a hormonal signal to your body to either kind of experience fear or pain, or to experience pleasure. And in the setting of things like grief, anger, anxiety, pain is a big part of that. And I think understanding kind of the physical aspect of this is really important. And then we kind of ourselves get to label what that emotion is based off of what we've learned from each other. And I think with emotions in general, I think it's also important to understand why we have them. Why did we evolve to have emotions? And I think the key there is that they really evolved, one, to help us survive, to kind of know what's dangerous and to be able to kind of act, and two, to help us connect with other people and to help kind of protect ourselves. And some of these emotions are really important to treat more like a fever, like particularly things like anger and anxiety, that it's your body's way of, and your brain's way of calling attention to something. One way that I think many of us think about things, including like grief, is the Kubler-Ross stages of grief, which are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And I think a way to kind of think about that may incorporate some of this is to think less of stages, because everybody's experience is very different, and to think of it more as kind of like tasks, which has been promoted by psychologist William Worden, which is kind of accepting kind of what the emotion is, processing it, and adjusting kind of your life with kind of what's happened, and finding ways to endure that that connection. And I think it's important to also note that the idea is not to take the emotion and just kind of smother it or make it go away immediately. The idea is to pay attention to it in some way and kind of see why it is that this feeling has come up. If you're feeling miserable, there's a reason why you're feeling miserable, and it's important to not just kind of get rid of that kind of negative feeling, but to actually figure out what's going on. And to that, there's a tool that's been used by psychologists that use kind of this acronym, it's called RAIN, and some of you may have heard it. And what I like about it is it incorporates lots of these different elements that I mentioned. So the R stands for recognize, the A stands for allow, the I is for investigate, and the N stands for nurture. So the R, the recognize, it's about realizing that you have this emotion going on and giving it a name. And it's so important to actually name the emotion as kind of refined a way as possible. The A, allow, is about kind of just letting the emotion happen, whatever this experience is, rather than immediately ignoring it or diverting to something else. give yourself that space to pause and just sit in it, and really just invite it in. I is to investigate, which really means asking yourself what's really demanding your attention right now. And that might mean kind of doing a body scan, looking at kind of what parts of your body are tense or contracted, and then asking yourself, so what is it that I need right now? It might be that you need to feel acceptance or forgiveness or belonging or love or safety or an embrace or security, or even if it's just a break. And then finally, the N, which stands for nurture, is to kind of be kind to yourself and offer yourself that which you need. Maybe if you need a break, maybe it's a nap or a meditation. If it's kind words, thinking really intentionally about what those kind words are that you want to hear, and then actually allow yourself to speak them or hear them from the voice of whoever it is that you would benefit the most from hearing that. And all of that really helps to create kind of a larger and lighter space for yourself. And kind of in kind of worst case scenario where you really just don't have kind of the cognitive capacity to really address this, there's this one technique which is really basic, which is what I call almost like a fail-safe, which is to breathe. Taking kind of a long, slow breath immediately begins to recruit the part of your nervous system that helps to kind of rest and slow your heart rate. And that begins to give you not just the space, but an opportunity for the higher functioning areas of your brain to kind of come online and help to regulate and process. So that way you can move forward and actually use those feelings towards some kind of action to fulfill what's needed.
Thank you so much, Joelle, for that. Really appreciate it. So we are now going to turn to my friend Tess Thomas, who is an inclusive talent leader, and she'll be sharing more really on experience of writing, but perhaps more than that, as a way to process strong emotions. So I will turn it over to you, Tess.
Great. Thank you so much, Bob, and thanks everyone for coming today. So I'll start off by simply sharing that I'm not a published author yet, but I've been writing my entire life. I'm currently working on a memoir, and I post a lot of my other work online. I come from a background of significant adversity, and I've examined and processed a lot of my trauma and adverse experiences through writing, which is essentially why I'm here with you today. So about processing trauma and emotions through writing, I tend to think that the goal is to explore, it's to examine, it's to feel and process, and also gain perspective. This can be very beneficial for all types of life events, both big and small, the seemingly minor as well as the significant. It doesn't have to be any specific type of event. And there are 3 different types of writing that I tend to lean into and find very beneficial, 2 of which are forms of journaling, and then the last of which is creative writing. So now, descriptive journaling is the first one I'll talk about, and this is writing about the event to state facts, to gain clarity, and to understand timelines. This can also help to overcome our natural tendencies to avoid or block out painful events and experiences. It's a very common human action. But more importantly, descriptive journaling, it can be very helpful to help us identify our thoughts and emotions. And I have a little bit of homework for everyone over the weekend. Think about an event in your life that descriptive journaling might help you with. Maybe it's a disagreement with your partner that feels a bit nebulous, or something that happened years ago that you still aren't clear on. Just take a few seconds now to write something down so that you can take that into the weekend and write about it. Now, reflective journaling, what I call reflective journaling, but it's also commonly thought of as expressive writing. Now, this is writing that is personal and emotional, but without regard to standard writing conventions like grammar or sentence structure. In short, it's writing freely without giving thought to how it sounds, if it's like right, or even who might read it. And a pro tip is that most of the time, reflective journaling is just for you. Nobody else is going to be reading it, so you can have a little bit more freedom to expand in that. Now, expressive writing, this type of journaling has actually been proven to increase cognitive function, counteract negative effects of stress, and I believe strengthen the immune system. But it's also proven to be very helpful with PTSD and anxiety, which I feel is very appropriate for today's topic. Now, reflective journaling is incredibly helpful to help us explore our thoughts and emotions. And as you remember, descriptive journaling is more specific for identifying those thoughts and emotions. So you can kind of pick and choose which one of these might make the most sense for you right now. And a second homework assignment for the weekend can be just think about your weekend and your plans. When can you find 20 to 30 minutes of uninterrupted time to do some reflective journaling? And maybe you're a caregiver and you only have 10 minutes. That's totally fine. The whole point of this exercise is to start the behavior, put it into practice, find some time to write, sit down, put your pen to paper, and then simply just see what comes and how helpful you find it. So thirdly, I'll talk a little bit about creative writing, and this is the writing form that I tend to lean in myself most significantly. As we all know, it is a form of artistic expression, so it may not seem right or even like feel right for everyone, but I also want to stress that it's okay to write just for yourself or for a select audience, and that might give you a little bit more permission to take a risk if this isn't something you already do. For many, I think creative writing can help allow for deeper processing of emotions as well as perspective. For me, there's an expectation of vulnerability in my own work, which therefore demands vulnerability within myself. And I do tend to feel that the best writing is vulnerable writing, whether it's creative or journaling or any other form of writing. My personal work is incredibly personal. It definitely involves others, in the world around me, but it's centric to my feelings and to my perspective. So if you think about it in that way, it can help people get started often. But again, this has just helped me to deal with issues that I've battled and continue to battle with things like family, with race, which is incredibly significant right now and always, interpersonal relationships, childhood trauma, etc. And so when I think about the final homework assignment, think of a creative writing medium that you're comfortable with or that you're curious about. And this could be like poetry or a short story or maybe songwriting. And maybe take the life event that you focused on in the descriptive journaling exercise, where you're a little bit more focused on uncovering and identifying your emotions, and then try to write creatively about that. And yes, this might be a little bit of a way to force you to do the actual homework assignments I shared earlier. And as I come to a close, I just want to call out that, writing to process strong emotions and experiences, it can be very painful and it can be very difficult. It is hard work, but the exercise of writing, particularly with journaling, and then sometimes the final work itself, particularly for me with creative writing, it can be very healing. So would love for you to keep that in mind as your last thought from me as you go into the rest of the weekend.
Tess, thank you for that. Actually, very, very helpful set of homework assignments for all of us. Really appreciate this. So next, I'm going to turn to jodyscheler. So Jody is someone I've known for more than 20 years. She is a leading therapist, mental health professional, and she's going to share with us some of her background and experience working in mental health. So I will turn it over to you, Jody.
Hi, I'm going to be speaking about experiences of anger, anxiety, and grief. And I will focus on 3 or 4 coping and healing strategies as well through an emotional and psychological lens. Anger, anxiety born of uncertainty, grief, and trauma are painfully interconnected. Traumatic events overwhelm our ordinary systems of care that give us a sense of control, connection, and meaning. All of us here today are shareholders in our collective trauma. As such, we experience varying degrees of isolation, anxiety, numbness, anger, grief, and hypervigilance, other feelings as well. These emotions are central experiences in our stories, those we tell about ourselves, those told about us, and those are the things that happen to us. Coming together as participants today, a significant coping strategy in itself, reflects our hunger for connection and elicits our collective curiosity. Grieving is an essential and universal experience of our human condition. It is related to the death of a loved one, the loss of a relationship, the loss we may experience as a result of leaving or being left, and of letting go. It may also include the loss of dreams, expectations, and illusions. And in our current reality, the loss of things critical to our sense of well-being: touch, hugging, holding and being held, and even the ability to see a smile from behind our masked faces. Grief encompasses physical, emotional, behavioral, and psychological responses. Loss and grief will manifest themselves through any number of symptoms because grief and mourning are inescapable. It's important to be mindful that grief and loss live on in the timelessness of our unconscious minds, and they reappear at different developmental stages. And I can talk more about that maybe later in questions if anyone's interested. As J.L. Moreno, the father of psychodrama, states, the body remembers what the mind forgets. Psychodrama is a guided dramatic process that enables us to work through unresolved issues or anticipated future concerns by creating, reenacting, and re-experiencing them dramatically. In our current reality, there are innumerable unresolved losses. Deaths, people dying alone without funerals or grieving rituals, unspeakable violence against innocent men and women, and the loss of leadership to help navigate this frightening time. Coping and healing occur in a number of ways. Judith Herman, a noted trauma specialist, argues that there are three stages in trauma work. The first is establishing safety, which means building a safe, trusting, and non-judgmental relationship, within which the second is remembering and mourning, where the work is done. And the third is then being able to reconnect to the world and to one's relationship, significant relationships in the world. In this current moment, we need to establish a sense of safety by creating safe environments, much like this one, in which focusing on awareness, affect regulation, and self-care can be addressed. Here we will be able to share our stories of grief, fear, and anger, recognizing that anger serves two important functions. The first, a legitimate expression of hurt and outrage against injustice, and the second is a more complicated, nuanced expression of anger because it is a defense against pain and vulnerability. It often covers those emotions. Though uncomfortable, anger and vulnerability, like all feelings, are legitimate. We need not be frightened of them, hide them, judge them, or try to fix them. Feeling and expressing them is empowering and enhances our own sense of agency. Neuroscience is expanding our understanding of human nature and the healing process. E.L. Rossi, a psychobiologist, argues that, like psychodrama, the conscious experience of novelty, enriching life experience, and voluntary physical exercise promote new growth in the brain throughout our lives. Mindfulness, another effective coping mechanism, is an almost physical experience of being present. Practicing mindfulness enables us to create an emotional environment in which it is safe to let go of our clinging to the past, as well as our persistent struggles to control the future. While there's no one right way, many mindfulness exercises begin with bringing attention to the breath, as breathing is the link between one's body and mind. The common thread in these strategies is that the integration of body memory and conscious remembering enhances our coping process. Finally, the stories we tell matter. Our stories are about ourselves, our groups, about where we're coming from and where we are headed. They are about what we fear, what we have and struggle with, and what we dream about. The process of storytelling in itself can be healing, even transformative, as empathy is hopefully inherent in the sharing of stories. As we tell our stories, we define ourselves rather than letting our history alone define us. In a time of loneliness, our stories carry a sense of connection. They give our children a sense of caring and belonging. Telling one's story plays an especially significant role during times of change. At a time when the old structures are evolving and changing, when the old stories don't seem to be working anymore, we, the storytellers, become critical to the process of connecting the past to the present that will lead us through our uncertainty to a reimagined future. As storytellers, we have the power to tell the stories of anger, anxiety, and grief, and transform them into stories of curiosity, vulnerability, and resilience, reconnecting us to ourselves and our shared humanity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jody, for those really incredibly helpful insights, and definitely look forward to further conversation when we get to the conversation portion. Last but by no means least is Father Josh Thomas, who is the interim executive director of Seeds of Peace, but will speak to us. He's also an Episcopalian priest, so from perspectives of faith and spirituality, and perhaps also the perspective of peace building as well. Father Josh.
Thanks so much, Bob. It's great to be with you today. And I thought I would offer a few pieces of wisdom from those different dimensions of my life and work, religion, faith, conflict resolution, peace building, as well as organizational leadership as somebody who is working to guide institutions through this moment of change. On the religion and faith side, not being able to go to church and realizing that so much of my religious practice is bound up in gathering with others, it's invited me to take on some new practices and some new approaches in this time. And two that have been really helpful for me is reading religious texts with new eyes and seeking out rituals to mark times and transitions. Around the religious texts, I found myself looking at familiar verses and familiar words, but from a different perspective. Oftentimes, these texts are ones we read in the time of relatively stable and safe environment, at least for people who are in positions of privilege in society. But they're texts that were written in times of stress and struggle for in my own Christian tradition. So I've been looking at words like fear and anxiety and worry and trying to find what are the other concepts that are often paired with them as the antidote or the response. And around fear, there are many, many, many verses that pair fear with love. There's one text that says, perfect love casts out fear. And another that if you live in love, fear will be cast away. And so for me, the connection between fear and love, and what does it mean in this moment to surround ourselves with more love and to offer more love as a way of putting fear a bit in perspective. The one that was most striking for me was around worry and anxiety. And as I was reading through texts about worry and anxiety, they're often paired with concepts of the natural world, of putting our own human lives in perspective. So there'll be texts about thinking about the flowers of the field or the birds of the air, or even the great sea monsters of the biblical legends that'll invite humans to put our own life in this wider perspective. One of the practices that my partner and I have been doing most nights is taking a walk through the neighborhood and listening to the sounds of the crickets and the grasshoppers and the frogs. We have many of those in our neighborhood, and just being reminded that there is a world around us that is living its own life in very complex ways, and to put all of the emotions of our life in perspective. Thomas Merton, who is a great mystic and spiritual teacher, talked about this as being part of the general dance of creation and finding our place within this dance. The other thing that's been helpful as a spiritual faith resource has been looking at rituals to mark times and transitions. If you're anything like me, all of the days blend together, and multiple times a week I find myself asking, what day is today? Is it Wednesday or Tuesday? Is it morning or afternoon? Work for me, has sort of blended over into all parts of life, and finding some ways to separate different components of our life and our day has been really important. And so I've turned it through a lot of the interfaith work that I've done to the Jewish traditions around Shabbat and the practices to mark certain times as different from other times. And the start of a time of rest, of renewal, of regeneration, things that you do and don't do during certain parts of the day. I have some friends who have made a commitment at a certain time. I think it's 7 o'clock in the evening that they stop working, and then every day they'll make dinner together, say the nighttime prayers, and then watch a dumb show on TV and then go to bed, realizing that unless they forced themselves to make a break, the times would just spill over. I'm also thinking about the various transitions that are happening in our lives and how to bring a bit of consciousness and awareness to those moments. My dad, for instance, is a nurse anesthetist at a hospital, and the practice of dressing and undressing with gowns and the masks and the face shields are moments of really significant transition. And there is a long set of prayers in the Christian Catholic tradition for when a priest would put on various garments, a prayer for putting on the white robe, a prayer for putting on the scarf that we wear, a prayer for different kinds of capes and items, and realizing that as we're interacting with these tangible items that mark some dimension of the emotionally complex world that we're in, that those moments of transition can also be opportunities to bring a bit of consciousness to our lives. So reading text with fresh eyes, seeing what bits of wisdom are paired with these strong emotions, seeking out rituals to mark times and transitions are two pieces of faith practice that have been helpful for me in this moment. On the conflict resolution side, I've been diving into the work of a friend and colleague, Eran Halperin, who has done some research on the role of emotions in conflict and peace building, especially looking at why do people have such different emotional reactions to the same series of events or pieces of information. And so what are the antecedents of various emotions? And the one that I wanted to focus on was anger, which is a complex emotion in the peace building field because it's filled with so much power, both for good and for bad. And that people tend to feel anger when there's a sense that someone has wronged us or a sense that someone else has disrupted our lives and the things that we feel are important to us. The tendency in that case is to react with blame towards the person or the object that we believe has caused that disruption in our life. But it doesn't necessarily need to unfold that way, and that anger can actually be an emotion that fuels social change, that fuels the resolution to conflict and a more just and equitable future. And so how do we approach an emotion like anger and be able to draw out the positive dimensions of that? And what he suggests is that there are two strategies in order to have anger be a constructive emotion and one that can yield change. And the first is to reappraise the situation, that if we find ourselves blaming others for disrupting our life, to sort of dial back with a bit of curiosity and ask why that is true. What are the pre-existing beliefs or biases that we might have about the person or people that we tend to blame? But the other that I thought was really interesting is to root in our own positive self-image and positive self-confidence. That a person who has a strong sense of self and a strong sense of their own power is less likely to blame others as the cause of their anger and more likely to be able to use that feeling in a positive and constructive kind of way. So I think I'll stop there for now, and we can have the rest of the conversation.
Olhem pelo branco. Não, 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 não.
Thank you so much, Father Josh, and thanks to all the panelists. So, gosh, there are so many themes that come up that I feel like actually have a connection, although they're coming from different disciplinary backgrounds, but really around kind of owning and feeling the emotion, giving yourself a space to do that. And to kind of acknowledge it and process it, which I think can be really, really challenging because it's so painful. But that's kind of one of the themes that I noticed. I think another theme that really kind of comes up is how do we find spaces where we can do that in a safe way, whether that's through writing or through experiencing nature in some way, or through looking at different kinds of spiritual or religious texts. So it's really interesting for me to think about how disciplines come from different perspectives, and yet there's a way in which it's landing in similar ways of handling or processing these emotions. So we have little over 10 minutes or so to get some questions. Before I do that, I just want to maybe invite any of the panelists wanted to either add something based on hearing one of the other panelists speak, or alternately ask a panelists a question before I kind of turn to those who are participating remotely to ask some questions.
I guess the only thing I would add, Bob, is just the sense that that we're in a moment in time when everything is changing, right? Everything around us is shifting. Institutions are changing. The norms of how we think about life is changing, and that there's an accumulated nature of these conflicts. So I was talking to some of my colleagues in peace building work in other parts of the world where lockdowns and restrictions on movement, et cetera, is a part of their daily lives. And then this moment adds on and adds on and adds on and adds on. And so invite us also, as we think about the way that each particular person is experiencing these moments, to be aware of what the baseline and the starting point is for folks who have been experiencing violence, restrictions on movement, poverty, pain, suffering of various types, that this is, for some people, a particular moment of change and different. So for others, this is another manifestation of a long-term pattern of accumulated challenges.
Yeah, oh, that's really, really helpful. And a sense, perhaps some people have been living without any respite for a long period of time, and then others for whom this is new, or feels newer, also are dealing with no respite, it seems like. So why don't we turn to some questions? I noticed one from Lynn, and I'll read it aloud. It says, I am familiar with the concept of sitting with an uncomfortable emotion. It so often feels like this could be paralyzing. How do you do this and continue with responsibilities? It's a really hard and important question. I wonder if any of the panelists would be willing to take it on.
I can jump in here. There's a lot going on right now, and one might argue that there's often a lot that we're always juggling and managing. And I think that the best way to tackle it is to create a space for it, so that it's like time blocking, right? The way you might organize your day at work. You give yourself, if it's 10 minutes, if it's 40 minutes, if it's an hour, whatever it might be, the time to sit down and feel it and deal with it in whatever way that you're looking to process it. Could be deep breathing, it could be being present with yourself, it could be writing, it could be any of those things. And then once that time is up, then you move on. So allowing yourself to dive into it, but also creating a little bit of a safety net by not letting it consume your entire day. That can be possible for a lot of people, especially different people that might suffer from mental health challenges. So it's just one of those things of creating that boundary within your life, I think can be quite helpful to attack it and deal with it, but not letting it overcome everything.
Thank you, Ted.
I think to that point, I'll also add how I think we do need to give ourselves an opportunity to rest. We always have this feeling of we have a lot of different responsibilities. And I think that's also kind of these external pressures that are adding to this, the feelings that we're experiencing, the stresses that we're experiencing. It's kind of like a programming that we have to keep moving no matter what. And I think that adds to the problem. One method that I've found helpful, at least for myself, because one of the feelings that I've been experiencing throughout all this is this constant state of just being overwhelmed, is to take a moment and just label the feeling. So I'll take a breath and I'll say, I feel overwhelmed. I feel it. It's like where you in your body feel it. So I feel it in like the top of my throat, like a clenching, and then like just acknowledge it for that like moment, and then say what I need to hear at that moment. And for me, that might be something like, it's okay, sweetheart. I'm sorry. I'm here. And that can be just enough for that moment to be able to give me that respite that I need.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful. Jody, yeah, please.
And I might add that everything that both of you have said, and also that there's a way in that stuck moment of being with those feelings, those difficult feelings. One way is to take that deep breath and then allow yourself to go backwards in time to where else you may have felt that feeling. And then allow yourself to look at that and watch it as though it's a movie of locating yourself backwards in time and what happened in that moment that you felt this same set of feelings, which can assure you you will find a way to resolve them and come to the present, and also recognize the importance that you still carry them because they were an important lesson.
Thank you, Jody. So there's a few questions here. This is one from Jennifer Allison, who is perhaps the most amazing research librarian at Harvard Law School. It's really, I think, probably on a lot of people's minds. So what are some strategies to deal with feelings of disappointment, anger, and powerlessness when you feel alone and that you lack the support of helpful and compassionate leadership from people in power? This is one that probably many people in the US are experiencing now, but I think there are people in other parts of the world also experience it. I mean, Jody, it seems like you have a thought, and I'm imagining Father Josh may have a thought at least as well.
Yeah.
So, go ahead, Josh. And
No, go ahead, Jody. I'll have you.
So what first came to my mind was a really quite famous family therapist many, many, many years ago said that one of the ways to cope with that set of feelings was to form a professional cuddle group, and to be able to find one or two people that you can join together with and agree that each of you will be equally vulnerable with one another and be able to share the feelings of overwhelm and the absence of leadership, and discover that you can find in yourselves or in the work together that we have within us everything we need to be able to cope and to move forward, however painful it is.
I think the other thing I would add is there may be some people in positions of leadership who are not amenable to being helpful in these moments, but there are others who are. And I have been struck in my own work in the last couple of weeks about the expressions of disappointment, anger directed at me and as a leader of organizations to be able to be responding better and providing more support. And I have found those expressions really helpful. In people being willing to be honest, being willing to be straightforward, and say what you need. And I was in watching a conversation with Marianne Buddy, who's the Episcopal Bishop in Washington, D.C., who famously ended up on CNN after Trump got his picture taken in front of the church. And she talked about this feeling of being summoned by the expressions of you have to stand, you have to do something, you have to speak out. And I think it's actually a gift to people in leadership for you to express those desires and hopes, disappointments, because often they're what we need in order to be perhaps a bit more bold than we might have otherwise to cut through the many different competing agendas or sort of demands on our time. And so I would invite the expression of those feelings to people in power. You may not receive that positive response from everybody, but there are some folks who may need that nudge from you in order to be able to rise to the occasion ourselves.
Thanks, Father Josh. Maybe I'll take another question. Next, I would love to hear some further thoughts on the meaning of interfaith values, including how Buddhism may have influenced psychology and understanding of neuroplasticity, coping skills, and perhaps in a wider lens of the great grief. So thinking about many things going on in the world right now, major systems of upheaval across experiences of uprooting, subjugation, harmful structure. So thinking about collective grief and collective coping and healing processes. Anyone want to take that on?
I'll come in from the side of neurology and neuroscience in relation to this, and how a lot of different aspects relate. There is this kind of a term that I've heard is kind of like an ancient technology or this ancient wisdom. So that a lot of different faiths and practices have developed a lot of techniques and tools that are shared through stories and prayer and meditations. And a lot of kind of what undergirds a lot of that is this idea of kind of learning how to kind of accept kind of the situation, and also to kind of sublimate, to use that energy towards something. It also relates to just kind of how to move your attention and kind of regulate your experience. And I think kind of on the note of neuroplasticity, I think why that's important is that a lot of kind of the experience of living is not just like the kind of the events that happen, or they're not a moment, they're a process, and we're all on this lifelong journey of growth. And these feelings that we have kind of open up an opportunity to break you open to a new you, if you let it. And I think even the negative emotions that are kind of have this strong element of pain to it, I think as a part of the learning is to know that you can learn to feel pain without the suffering that can come from it.
Thanks, Joel. Other thoughts, or maybe we could take another question. So this is one that I've heard mentioned it a number of times in different ways, so maybe someone here will share, but it's the challenge of kind of keeping perspective and gratitude. So the example here is a parent may experience the loss of a graduation ritual this year, but then feels like this is really trivial in light of the fact that people are losing their livelihoods or losing their lives or greater challenges. And then maybe this is not in the question, but some of us may then experience guilt for feeling the way we do. Or so how do you keep perspective around this? Any thoughts?
I think that it's first, most importantly, that it is important to honor and recognize every experience of loss. And while missing one's graduation may seem trivial compared to all that's happening in the world, it's not to that person who has worked this long and worked this hard and wants that moment of celebration and recognition. And because these are the moments in our lives, in all of our lives, that have meaning and allow us to move forward. And I think for some people who have to give up some of those celebrations, some of those rituals, there is a sense of loss of ritual. And those rituals, both religiously and psychologically and sociologically, give us a way of moving forward. And so people are in this moment of trying to find ways to move forward in a time where we're all struggling with no ways of marking even time, let alone celebrations.
Maybe I'll do one more question, and then we'll go to the breakout group. So I'm going to take the last question from Allie. I'm an older person living alone in a small high-rise apartment in downtown Boston. I'm having trouble handling not so much the current isolation, but taking in the reality that this can continue for more than a year. And I don't know how to let that reality in without getting pretty bummed out. So this, I think, is really, many of you are talking about embracing the feeling and maybe also not wanting to embrace the feeling. Mm-hmm. So I wonder, what strategies for this challenge?
I think one of the things that I'm going back, maybe tie this to the graduation one, is to be, I think this is inviting organizations and institutions to really think in new ways about how to do these, how to mark these rituals or to provide kinds of support, rather than saying this is a short time, we're just going to grin and bear it and stopgap and then we'll be back to normal. That back to normal doesn't seem likely for a while. And so it's forcing hard conversations about what is the way forward. So for the high school near where I live happens to also be next to a Formula One racetrack. And so they did graduation on the racetrack with everybody in their cars, and like they turned it into a huge deal. It was a ritual super different from the one that people had imagined, but it had its own power. And I think that's the challenge of when school districts are asking this question: what does school mean even more, and what does the education and learning look like in a new future? And so I think that's been the biggest challenge for me, is to start thinking in creative ways about what might be a new way, what's a new way of providing support, what's a new way of forging community when the ways that we have done this before seem like they're not likely to return in the near future, and to kind of be on the lookout for glimpses of that, even things that look very unusual that might be signs of this new future. And maybe those new future signs will actually help address some of the deeper losses and the deeper challenges that have to do with our economic system and justice system and systems of public safety. So where are the bits of hope and bits of newness that might be a sign of a new way of interacting with one another? That's super challenging.
And I think one other thing that might be really useful as well is being able to keep ourselves focusing on the now, because the only thing we have is right now, right in this moment. And when we start beginning to think about what's going to happen a week from now, or a month from now, a year from now, but it's very easy to become overwhelmed. And if we can really work, and that's with that breath that Joel talked about, or mindfulness, around being able to just take a deep breath and say, right now, this is what I'm experiencing right now. And that can help quell some of that anxiety about what will happen further out. Because none of us know what will happen, but we do know what's happening right in this moment. And we can feel it in our own bodies.
Thank you. Panelists, you've all been so exceptional. I wish we could keep going. But I think there's also a value to giving people a chance to speak and share with each other in small groups. So what we're going to be doing in a moment is sending everybody to a small group. There'll be a facilitator there. If you somehow don't end up in a small group immediately, I will send you to a small group very quickly. It's the technology of Zoom. And you'll be there till shortly before 1:30 with a chance to share some more with each other and learn from each other. So we are going to do that now, hopefully, and then we'll return at the end. Krista, I think I'm going to have to actually have you do it, because when it came to me, it undid the pairings that you did. So I'm going to make you the host, Krista, and have you send them, because I think you'll still have the pairings.
This will just take one moment. While I'm doing this, if you want to take another question, it undid all the pairings when we transferred it.
Oh, it did?
Yeah, so I'm just going to quickly, recreate rooms, but you may want to just have some back and forth, or we can just continue with the questions too.
Yeah, that's fine. There's questions I didn't take, so let me ask one. So here's one that's kind of interesting. I'm struggling when in a Zoom group, for example, a person is feeling a loss of a vacation, whereas for another, it might be a job or financial security, and the former just can't leave their own space of loss. So maybe this is kind of how to think about handling your own strong emotions around something, and then seeing others with things that seem maybe less important. How might you think about that?
I can jump in on that. So one of the values of Buddhism talks about suffering, and it also acknowledges that suffering is not a competition. So if I break my arm and you lose your arm, that doesn't mean that your or my suffering is any different, right? For us, in our experiences, in the impacts that it's having on our own individual lives, for us, that is significant. And I'm not going to say that that it eliminates guilt. Guilt is a very strong emotion. And I think a lot of people are feeling that right now, especially those who are maintaining their jobs or their family and themselves are healthy, things like that. So acknowledging that guilt still exists, but also realizing and giving space for your own intense feelings about what is happening to you in your life, knowing that it still may not be as significant as somebody else's, it's still highly relevant and valued for you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I think there's an opportunity in this moment for us to come near to people and conversations that we might not have otherwise, and in a way facilitated by Zoom. So I have found myself, for instance, there's here in Austin where I live, the Austin Justice Coalition, which is a Black-led social justice movement that's been working on police reform and other policy changes with the city for years, that up till now has had small numbers of people, had thousands and thousands of people on a Zoom call the other day listening to stories that might not have been present otherwise. And so I have been reflecting on the way in which Zoom is inviting us to encounter people that we might not have seen otherwise. And just the fact that both of those people were on a Zoom call and heard those two stories may itself have some transformative and evocative results. And so to see in these online connections, conversations which may lead to greater empathy and understanding than if people had not interacted at all in the first place.
Krista,
I'll
can I
add
just, Joel, please, yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to add that this is also a really important opportunity to seize the time to listen. I think that's something that we could kind of get caught up in our own lives and don't have an opportunity to really listen to other people. And if you find yourself kind of feeling the need to be listened to, I think that there's probably somebody else in your life who wants somebody to listen to them. And so filling that role of a listener can actually be really, really pivotal in not only kind of understanding what's going on in your own life, but to give some perspective and also give you that sense of need and belonging and connection that is such a salve for some of these really painful feelings.
I've also been struck by thinking about being useful and feeling like a sense of purpose in these moments. In the Christian monastic tradition, there has always been a value on physical labor and the ordinary tasks of life. And so to be able, even as we sit with feelings and we listen to others, there's something to be said for washing the dishes and doing the laundry and helping a kid get through their online school, doing small acts of usefulness. My church is organizing diaper delivery to families who need that, and just the physical labor of packing up a bag that you can do one person in the hall by yourself, social distancing. It provides a sense of purpose even in those small things, and I think we all need some small way to feel a sense of agency and purpose, and to not underestimate the importance and the value of physical daily work, and the way that sometimes getting out of our heads and into our bodies can be healing as well. There's a Jewish mystical tradition that's really focused on dance and movement that suggests that the way to heal your mind is to get your feet moving, and I think that there's something in that as well.
Yeah, I'm